Hi everyone, and welcome to our campus urban farm training on diagnosing and preventing common farm plant problems. Let's get started. So the purpose of this lesson is to help you with troubleshooting. Now that you know all these great concepts of how to farm successfully, we can still run into some problems with the plant. So we want to help you identify those and be able to diagnose what's going on. So when it comes to all plants, we can attribute issues that we see in plants to about four major issues. So first being pathogens, second being abiotic factors, third being insects and pests, and fourth, improper care that usually also enhances the susceptibility to the problems. And that can include things like poor placement, over/underwatering, inadequate soil care, and pruning or lack thereof. So let's go through that. So starting off with one of the first causes is pathogens, also known as biotic factors. So pathogens are essentially viruses that affect the plant's overall health and appearance. Some proper growing conditions take into consideration proper light, humidity, air circulation, and water to prevent those pathogens. And if one of those conditions isn't met, plants are more susceptible to pathogen attack. And any disease that spreads over time is most likely caused by a pathogen. So some examples of common pathogens. Anthracnose is a fungal disease that tends to attack plants in the spring when weather is cool and wet, primarily on the leaves and twigs. So the fungi tend to overwinter in dead twigs and fallen leaves, and then cool and rainy weather will create perfect conditions for the spores to spread. Hence these kind of fungal infections that spread over your plants, based on those conditions. Another kind of common type of pathogen is fusarium wilt that specifically attacks potato, tomato, eggplant, and pepper plants. So again, that nightshade family, and that's actually in the soil. So it's a pathogen that just, basically enters through the roots and then interferes with all the water conducting vessels of the plants, causing this wilt. So in terms of dealing with, and another problem that comes up is leaf spots. So if you see a bunch of leaf spots that are just popping up all over the plant, that's generally an indication that it's a disease infection that's being caused by some sort of bacteria or fungi. So in terms of preventing pathogens, which is really the most effective form of management, is first of all proper care. So healthy plants in general are just more resistant to pathogens. So keeping them healthy also helps prevent a lot of these pathogens from cropping up. Another thing you can do is making sure you're pruning any disease leaf that's come out. A lot of the cases for pathogens, it'll continue to spread unless it's stopped. So if you find a diseased leaf, just try to prune that off and make sure it's separated away from your plant so it doesn't spread. Another preventative measure is making sure you're continually crop rotating when it comes to planting seasons. So soil pathogens tend to build up if you plant the same thing in that area season after season, especially since they're most often attracted to particular families of plants. So like the example from before, it particularly likes members of the nightshade family. So mixing it up by placing a different family member there will build up the odds that you won't continue to live in the soil. Another thing you can do is really implementing companion planting, because not only does it have some inherent benefits in terms of keeping the plant healthy, the diversity of plants also makes sure it's less likely to be taken out by the same disease. So because different plants are resistant to different diseases, it really helps make the whole bed more resilient if you have different types of plants in there, instead of just monocropping the whole thing with the same plant. Also, an important thing is to make sure you're using clean and healthy soil. At the campus urban farm, we always try to get fresh soil that's, factory sealed and not, necessarily amended with from campus soil. But there are situations where maybe in your home setting or you have to use the regular soil. So just making sure it's clean and healthy before you just dump that in there will help a lot. And also not transferring infected soil to other beds and things like that. Also, you want to avoid overwatering because most pathogens thrive in moist environments. So if you're overwatering, it'll create that really moist environment that pathogens tend to generate off of. So making sure you're sticking to the watering plan, not overwatering, will help in a lot of these cases. So the second category of diseases or pathogens we need to worry about is, or not pathogens, the abiotic diseases. So these are the things that are affected by the non-living factors. So they can impact plants just as much as the biotic living factors like insects can. And weather is the main abiotic factor that is just part of the environment, and that has the ability to inhibit plant health as well as destroy crops. And if you have plant damage that doesn't really spread, it's probably caused by an abiotic disease. So some of these abiotic diseases can include physiological factors. So examples include reactions to extreme temperature change, wind, hail, excessive rain, drought, chemical burn, exposure to air pollutants like automobile exhaust, and then some physical signs that plants are suffering from an abiotic disease are stunted growth and general crown dieback. So they're just not doing well as a whole. So here's some picture examples of, after, a drought or heat damage, all the plants tend to look like this. Excessive cold damage, where the plants are wilting, things like that. These are abiotic influences that are affecting the whole crop. So that's what it looks like. In terms of solutions of how you can deal with some of the abiotic factors is adjusting your watering and care to the localized weathering conditions. So for example, if there's an extreme heat day, providing some extra water to counterbalance that. If you're dealing with extremely sensitive plants, bringing them inside or maybe putting them in a sheltered area temporarily during extreme cold, that can help. If you are kind of rooted to that area, you can also temporarily put up some kind of clear tarp to protect from extreme weather events, and just like physically trying to adjust for those abiotic factors. Also, it's important to try to apply some extra care after an extreme weather event to counterbalance the influence from that weather event. In general, most plants are fairly resilient and will bounce back with the right care if you apply that extra water or keep it out of the conditions, etc. So you can bounce back from an extreme weather event like that. Thirdly, there's also insects. So managing insects is a very important step. And first you have to distinguish, not all insects are bad. So there are beneficial insects and there's also harmful insects. So some harmful insects include slugs and cutworms, Japanese beetles, aphids, and white grubs that will actively destroy your crops. And insect damage can usually be detected by the types of holes that are being left behind. So for example, if you see lots of minor tunnels or chewed edges on the leaves, or just like these holes that are clearly jagged, that are being left by mandibles or bite marks, that's generally an indication that's an insect. Simple practices such as removing the plant residue from the previous year's garden to kind of clear out that old plant matter, regularly inspecting the plants to make sure that there aren't new insects and insect damage that are coming through, as well as treating plants with eco-friendly insecticide can help remedy a lot of these insect problems. And again, remember all your integrated pest management techniques that you learned about to help mitigate these pests from showing up in your garden. Here's an example of some insect damage. Generally damage like this indicates the presence of insects like aphids or scales or spider mites and whiteflies, which tend to damage the plant itself and create a lot of these jagged holes and structural damage to the plants because they're actively eating them. So the fourth factor that tends to come into play is improper care, which tends to exacerbate kind of these other conditions that you've seen. When you boil it down, essentially all plants need the same thing. So all plants need adequate sunlight, they need water, they need air, both in the soil as well as the atmosphere, and good soil. So the problems that are associated with not providing these things include, for example, not providing adequate sunlight at the right levels, could include wilting, either because it's too hot or it's not getting enough sun. You can also get sunburn if it's if you've got too much sunlight, and just a lack of production if there's not enough sunlight to keep it going. For water, whether it's over or under watering can cause wilting, curling leaves, mildew and mold problems. So those are all conditions that will result from inadequate care in terms of watering. Now, air is important to have both in the soil because you want to avoid compaction. If the soil is too compacted, like it's really pressed down or hasn't been broken up, the roots will have a hard time breaking through, and it can really damage the health of the plant. So that can result in dieback, poor growth, overall decline in health. And also you have to consider the air from the atmosphere as well. In terms of making sure there's enough airflow around the plant so that it can actually breathe. So you don't want to trap it, in terms of leaving a tarp on it or putting too many plants close to it. That'll impact your plant growth as well. And when it comes to soil, again, poor soil can cause dieback, poor growth, overall decline in health. So soil is a very important part of the equation as well when it comes to care for your plants. So some solutions when it comes to these problems, when it comes to adequate sunlight, you can always physically put or move the plant to the right place appropriate for its sunlight needs. So if it's really not doing well in terms of not getting enough sunlight or maybe getting too much, you can always move it to a different part of the garden to make sure it's happier. Um, Also, you want to prune regularly to make sure the plant isn't blocking its own sunlight. So again, that tomato plant example where it's like such a dense understory, it's blocking light to its own parts, or if it's so close to another plant that that plant is blocking its sunlight. Those are all things that you want to prune for and or move to make sure you're addressing. Also, when it comes to water, again, check the watering guide that we've provided for you. Make sure that you're adhering to that. But you also want to periodically test the soil with your fingers and actually do a touch test to feel if the moisture levels are adequate. So you want to make sure that adequate water is actually reaching underneath the soil into the roots. So if it's too soggy or dry, if you dig down a couple inches, then that means that there's going to be a problem. Also, when it comes to air, both in the soil and from the atmosphere, you want to avoid soil compaction with good soil practices. So periodically turning the soil with a shovel to make sure there's lots of air aerated into the soil, making sure there's a healthy compost in there, and really building up a good soil composition will help ensure there's enough air going on. Also, like things like making sure that when you do build your raised beds, you're not building it so large. Anything larger than 4 feet is generally too big because then you actually have to step into the bed to make sure you're caring for it. And that's also a source of soil compaction. So little things like that to make sure you're not pressing down on that soil and causing the roots to get blocked up. Again, pruning regularly will help also increase airflow. So it'll make sure that all the leaves have enough access to air so it can continue to breathe. And making sure you're not overcrowding with other plants. When it comes to the actual soil health, again, and going back to your previous lessons about composting, ensuring appropriate nutrient balance, making sure that there's plenty of compost in there, that the NPK ratios are good in terms of the nutrients, it's sufficiently aerated, it has good drainage. Those are all things that you can do from a care perspective to make sure that your soil is healthy. And in general, all of these rules of thumb are, just to basically give you some tools, because with all plants, if you respond and act quickly, you can generally save your plant and bring them back to a healthy state. So again, plants are fairly resilient. So if you, make sure you're paying attention to your plants and follow some of these solutions and do your research, hopefully you can have a successful garden and continue helping us grow successful crops at the Campus Urban Farm.